Welcome to the Apologist bookshelf. Gary Zacharias here. I don't know what your thoughts are about AI, but I know I've read a lot in that field, and I'm finding some wonderful things coming and some pretty terrible things coming. And we need to be ready. We need to be wise. We need to know what's going on. We know how to use AI effectively, and we need to warn people about some of the bad aspects of it as well. So there's a book called 2084 by John Lennox, and I like John Lennox a lot. I've done chapters 4, 5, and 6, so you can take a look at previous podcasts and see what I covered there. I like chapter 7. I want to get to that one now, so we're kind of marching through the middle of the book. This is called Artificial General Intelligence. The Future is Dark, ? Now, he's been covering chapters that talk about the future is bright, so he's done some of the positives, but this one casts a shadow, and we see the shadow from the very opening of the chapter. He has a quote from Vladimir Putin, who knows something about leadership, quote unquote, as far as a tyrant goes. He says, artificial intelligence is the future not only for Russia, but for all humankind. It comes with colossal opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. Now, if anybody knows about threats, I would think it'd be Putin. He goes on to say, whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world. Well, let's hope it's not Putin. Let's hope people that can use it better. But, AI is a tool, isn't it? And like all tools, they can be used for good or for ill. We can take a hammer and do some wonderful construction work, and we can wreck things with a hammer. So we have to be a little careful here. He starts off with an environmental expert, James Lovelock. He developed the Gaia hypothesis, the idea that the Earth is an ecosystem that kind of regulates itself. He suggests humans need to probably step aside and make the way for something new. He said, quite soon, before we've reached the end of this century, I think that what people call robots will have taken over. Well, I don't know how you feel about that, but that's something. Then there's a cosmologist, Max Tegmark, who's a physicist as well. He's president of the Future of Life Institute at MIT. He said, in creating AI, we're birthing a new form of life with unlimited potential for good or ill. Well, it says how much science, this is now Lennox talking, how much science lies behind the statement is another matter, since he says up till now, all AI and machine learning algorithms are no more alive than Microsoft Word. That's what somebody said. So is that the case? He said, somebody says it's kind of like electricity, right? How we've changed because of electricity. And actually, Lennox says, I'm looking here, he says we really should be comparing AI with nuclear energy rather than with electricity. Electricity, a few people have been harmed, but for the most part, electricity's done a world of good. But he says, if you compare AI with nuclear energy, think about the research into nuclear energy. We've ended up with nuclear power stations. That's good. But it's led to nuclear arms race that almost led the world to the brink of extinction. He says AI creates problems probably greater than that. Yeah. So he says, let's think about these speculations. The research hasn't really gotten there yet, and there are a lot of speculations about AI, what it can do or what it would do. Now, what are the assumptions, he says? Are they in the interests of all of us, simply of an elite few who want to dominate? He said, it kind of depends on our worldview. He says, what's ultimate reality, right? That's a particularly important worldview question. He quotes from physicist Sir John Polkinghorne. If we are to understand the nature of reality, we have only two possible starting points, either the brute fact of the physical world or the brute fact of a divine will and purpose beyond that physical world. That's worth saying again, isn't it? What is reality? It's either the brute fact, in other words, you can't do anything about it, there it is, of the physical world. In other words, you look around, that's it. Or he says a brute fact of a divine will. You can't do anything about that either, and there's a purpose behind this. Well, the next section of this chapter then is subtitled Our Brains Computers. And I think that's really interesting to talk about. I've done a lot of reading in that area. So Lennox starts off, he said, the worldview that's behind a lot of writing about what's ahead for us focuses on the idea that this world is all there is, right? Atheism, just brute physical facts about the world. Sean Carroll has a book called The Big Picture. And so Lennox quotes from him, "We humans are blobs of organized mud, which through the impersonal workings of nature's patterns have developed the capacity to contemplate and cherish and engage with the intimidating complexity of the world around us. The meaning we find in life is not transcendent." Oh, that's really sad, isn't it? It's just saying reducing. It's called reductionism. Reduces everything down to just physicality. So Carol is pointing out as an atheist that the human abilities that we have, mental abilities, just emerge naturally from the biosphere. And said it could happen again. So you could have life emerging from the silicon sphere. So if our mind came about through just random particles bouncing around just this physical universe, then why can't life come from a physical sphere? Nick Bostrom says this: "We know that blind evolutionary processes can produce human-level general intelligence, since they've already done so at least once. Evolutionary processes with foresight, that is, genetic programs designed and guided by an intelligent human programmer, should be able to achieve a similar outcome with far greater efficiency." I think that is, frankly, I find that kind of chilling, but do you hear what he's saying there? That since just blind evolution, just kind of working away with random mutations and all, that's produced us with our level of intelligence, then if you took genetic programs run by intelligent people, we should be able to produce some kind of outcome for the next level of intelligence, which would be a machine. Wow. So Lennox says what he's concerned about is the impression that you get from people like Bostrom that the human brain is just a computer. He says it's one thing to say that the human functions, our brain functions in a certain way like a computer, but it's completely different to say that our brain is nothing but a computer. So he points out simulation is not duplication. He says, what if we could construct robots that physically look like us and in their brain power at least capable of fooling us? Would that make them intelligent? And he says, I don't think so. And he talks about the famous Chinese room experiment. And I've done this in my PowerPoint when I've talked on this topic. So let me explain that here as Lennox lays it out. The Chinese room experiment. Look up Berkeley philosopher John Searle, Searle. He's the one that came up with this. So here's what this experiment looks like. It's just a thought experiment. Imagine that you have a native speaker. Okay, he's an English speaker, doesn't know any Chinese, and he's locked inside a room that has a whole bunch of Chinese symbols in boxes, together with a book of instructions to how to manipulate those symbols. That's the program. So imagine people outside the room send in other Chinese symbols, which are questions in Chinese. That's the input, but the guy in the room doesn't know that. But as he sees these symbols coming in, he follows the instructions in the program, and he can pass out on the other end, the output, Chinese symbols that are correct answers. And so that's what you get there is it looks like there's understanding of Chinese, but the person on the inside doesn't understand a word of Chinese. So does that make sense that the person on the inside has taken material in and just done a program there and put out the answer, but didn't know that he was doing Chinese at all? So he's saying, the Searle's experiment is saying that digital computers don't have any thinking. They don't understand anything. They're just crunching some numbers and coming out, spitting out something that sounds like it's intelligent, but it's not. Oxford mathematician Roger Penrose, that's a big name. He argues the brain has to be more than a computer, since it can do things no computer can ever do in theory. In his view, no computer could ever simulate the mind. Then there's a software architect, Brendan Dixon. He said computers don't play games like humans play games. They don't create like humans create. Computers, at their most fundamental level, don't even solve computational problems like we solve them. Okay. Roger Epstein, who's a former editor of Psychology Today, also rejects this idea that the brain is like a computer. He says, this is Roger Epstein, "Forgive me for this introduction to computing, but I need to be clear. Computers really do operate on a symbolic representation of the world. They store, they retrieve, they really process, they really have physical memories. They're guided in everything they do by algorithms, rules, in other words." Now he switches over and he says, what about humans? Humans, on the other hand, do not, never did, never will. Why do so many scientists talk about our mental life as if we were computers? That's Roger Epstein, former editor of Psychology Today. So they said, back to Lennox here, he says, take a neural network. They could pick out a cat on a YouTube video, but they have no concept of what a cat is. So we're really not talking about a conscious entity. He has an AI expert chime in at this point, Margaret Bowden. She says, computers don't have goals. The fact that a computer is following any goal at all is explained by a goal of a human agent. An AI program's goals or priorities or values don't matter to the system. When DeepMind's AlphaGo, that's the game of Go, beat the world champion in 2016, it felt no satisfaction, still less exultation, right? Gary Kasparov, on the other hand, got crushed by IBM's Deep Blue in a chess match, and he was devastated. And so Margaret Bowden continues, it makes no sense to imagine that future AI might have needs. They don't need sociality or respect in order to work well. A program either works or it doesn't. Yeah, so I think that's really good. Well, so it sounds kind of negative, right? The computers are not really brains, don't have brains like we do. But then he says, yeah, but let's take a look at somebody who's a very optimistic person looking at AI, and that's Yuval Harari, Harari. He had a book called Sapiens, bestseller. And here's what Harari says. For close to 4 billion years, every single organism on the planet evolved subject to natural selection. Not even one was designed by an intelligent creator. The biologists are right about the past, but the proponents of intelligent design might ironically be right about the future. So we go back to Lennox. He says, yeah, but evolution didn't produce life in the first place. Right? So there's the challenge right there. The reason is that biological evolution only gets going when you already have life. Right? So think about Harari's kind of making it sound like life came about because of evolution. So he says you can't explain the existence of something on the basis of one of its consequences. So Harari is jumping the gun. And then Harari goes on to say, humankind is poised to replace natural selection with intelligent design and to extend life from the organic realm into the inorganic. And he says it's going to happen through cyborg engineering and biological engineering. Yeah, okay, so that's where Harari is saying that's where things are going. Lennox says, boy, that's an elitist prospect because it's going to get very, very expensive to do some of these things. So he said he's got a scenario of a world dominated by AGI, right? Artificial intelligence. What would that look like? Well, he goes back to MIT physicist Max Tegmark. He imagines how world domination might occur in 3 steps. First, you make human-level AGI. Then you use it to create superintelligence. And then you unleash the superintelligence to take over the world. Whew. That's a little scary to think about, huh? Yeah. So what do we end up with a world like that? So Tegmark investigates a wide variety of AGI scenarios that have been suggested by people who are involved. Some assume, oh, by the way, it's AGI. I'm sorry, I forgot to explain artificial general intelligence. In other words, like us. So Tegmark talks about different leading figures in the AGI scene. Some assume humans can control it and maybe use it to eliminate opposition. But others say it's going to break out and take control of us and maybe eliminate us. So, of course, the question that Lennox brings up is how can we ensure that such a superintelligence would safeguard human interests and not threaten human existence? He said, that's huge, isn't it? He says, it's kind of sad in a way. He said there's human irony there of wanting as much as possible, as much choice, but then abdicating our choice and delegation to machines that are programmed by others. And those will be their decisions and not ours. Pretty sad. Well, that's a kind of a sad view of what might be coming down the road here. If you end up with what they call homo deus, right, the next level of human development through these machines, and it could be a malevolent God, right, something pretty negative. As he wraps up the chapter, I'm saying he again, that's John Lennox, quotes from J. Budziszewski at the University of Texas. And I'd give you his spelling, but it's a nightmare. Okay, I'll take a second here because he's a really good author and a wonderful professor. So it's J, period, and here's the last name, Budziszewski, Budziszewski. He's at the University of Texas. Here's what he says. Genesis, I think, is at the crux of it. To abolish and remake human nature is to play God. The chief objection to playing God is that someone else is God already. If he created human nature, if he intended it, if it's not the result of a blind fortuity that did not have us in mind, then we have no business exchanging it for another. It'd be good to remember that Genesis contains not only the story of creation, but the story of Babel, of the presumption of men who thought they could build a tower to heaven. Okay, so that's Budziszewski. Interesting to hear what he's saying there, that we're starting to play God, but we believe there already is a God who knows far better. I mean, all you have to do is think about all the times that people came along and said, trust us, we're scientists, we can do things better. And they came up with the idea of lobotomies. Well, that didn't turn out very well. They had thalidomide. That was going to be a big chemical boost to people, and that didn't turn out well. So I'm not saying don't trust science. I mean, science has done some amazing things, but leaving a potential future superintelligence in the hand of scientists, they're people like the rest of us. They make mistakes. They're human. It seems pretty scary, especially when Budziszewski reminds us, yeah, in Genesis, we get the creation story, which is very positive, but you also get the story of Babel, when people decided to ignore God, went out and built a tower on their own. Kind of like if AI decides to ignore us and go off on its own. Well, Budziszewski continues here. You say you want man to be to himself what God has been to man. But what God has been to man is man's absolute superior, and man cannot be his own superior. A thing can be equal to itself, but it cannot be greater than itself. So what you really mean, when he's talking about the people who are pushing AI, what you really mean is you want some men to be to other men what God has been to man. You want some men to be the absolute superiors of others. I assume that you want to be in the former group and not in the latter. You say you want to change the human design, but in that case there must be two groups, those who cause the change and those who result from it, and the former hold all the cards. Yeah, I mean, you can see what's going on there. It's going to be a world of the haves and the have-nots. It's going to be the world of the few who would kind of tell the rest of us how things will be, because you've got to program those computers. So whoever does the programming runs things. So he said there's no avoiding, back to Lennox now, there's no avoiding the topic of God when we think of the future. Tegmark, back to him again, he observes many people like the protector God scenario for AI, because it's a lot like major religions. So Lennox says, let's go to the biblical source of these religions to see what it has to contribute, especially the book of Genesis. So I'll stop there and we'll pick that up another time. Chapter 8, the one that I'm not going to do right now, but it's called The Genesis Files. What is a human being? And so, by the way, at the end of every chapter, he's got very complete notes of where he's gotten some of his references. And so that's John Lennox, a very thought-provoking book. Hard to do justice to it just in one podcast, but at least it gives you a feel for what he's up to here, looking at AI and the human race, the good and the bad and the ugly. Well, thank you for being part of the podcast today. I appreciate it. Let me know if you have any questions or any comments. You can email me, theapologistbookshelf@gmail.com. Thanks. Talk to you later.